Debate has been raging in Canberra this week after the federal government introduced the carbon tax legislation to Parliament.
Now, each sitting week on News Breakfast, we're joined by two political elders to discuss the week in politics. In a moment, we hope to be joined by the former Democrat Senator Andrew Bartlett. We're just having a few difficulties getting him on the line. But the former Nationals Minister for Agriculture, Peter McGauran, is with us from Sydney, and he joins us first of all. Peter McGauran, good to talk to you again. Good morning.
Thanks, Virginia. Glad to be with you.
And hopefully you'll be joined in just a moment by Andrew Bartlett. But look, in the meantime, a lot of major issues that are on the plate of the federal government at the moment, and it's a good position for you to be in to take a step back and I guess look at it from a more lofty position. With asylum seekers, an issue that's sort of dividing the parliament, that seems to be sending Tony Abbott off in a direction that even seems to deny basic Liberal Party policy and certainly runs the risk of dividing the country. Is there another approach that could be taken here in your view?
Well, Tony Abbott's been entirely consistent now for many months. He believes in a Pacific solution that includes Nauru and temporary protection visas, and he's not shifting from that. So the Prime Minister ramping up the rhetoric and in some way it's attempting to enlist him by moral blackmail to support her position of strengthening her Malaysian solution is unfair. Tony's been entirely consistent. Everything he said this week is a reflection of what he said previously.
But isn't it inconsistent, given that it's been Liberal Party policy for quite some time to process people offshore, as many as you possibly can? Isn't it inconsistent then to not be part of amendments to legislation that allows precisely that? If he wants his Nauru solution, most of the most eminent legal minds in the country seem to say, well, you've got to then amend the legislation following that High Court decision.
It would be inconsistent if Tony Abbott believed that the Malaysian solution, as proposed by the Prime Minister, was the answer. But he believes it's a very bad deal. Malaysia takes 800 refugees from Australia. There's 400 already accredited, ready to go, and in return we get 4,000 who take the place of the orderly system we have for African and Middle Eastern refugees.
Yeah, but I didn't ask you that. It was about actually Tony Abbott being able to then prosecute his own policy. He needs to make that amendment, doesn't he? And isn't that basically Liberal Party policy to be able to do that offshore?
He doesn't believe so. It is Liberal Party policy to have offshore processing as a deterrent to people smugglers, but he believes that the Immigration Act and the provisions attached to it are sufficiently drafted, as they were during the Howard years, to further his Nauru option. There's no responsibility of Tony Abbott to get the Prime Minister and the government out of the hole they've dug for themselves.
Andrew Bartlett, we can bring you in now from Brisbane as a former leader of the Democrats and as a Greens candidate at the last election. Looking back at what the two major parties are up to on asylum seeker politics, what's your take?
Well, unfortunately, it is about politics rather than the policy, and this is partly why this area is in such a shambles. I mean, leaving aside the fact that, for Australia, this is actually a very small number of people and is not a major problem. It is a major problem for the refugees that need to risk their lives on boats. I think there's pretty much universal agreement across the spectrum that it would be better if refugees didn't need to risk their lives on dangerous boat journeys, and really, I was about the only federal politician that went to Nauru. I went there 4 times. I think it's pretty clear that there's no guarantee that it would work this time, and it's also pretty clear that it's in great doubt that it would still be legal under the High Court's decision. Now, I don't think there should be offshore processing, but clearly both the government and the opposition do believe there should be offshore processing. The only real difference with Malaysia is it's got this rather curious and I think not tried before swap of 800 people for 4,000, and we can all speculate about whether that will work in reducing the flow of boats or not, but none of us really know. Basically, you've got this 3-way standoff in the federal parliament, and who knows where that might lead. Maybe Julia Gillard will get really into gambling and make it a double dissolution trigger.
You never know, but as a former Greens candidate, do you support the Greens' position that they won't support any legislation to facilitate offshore processing?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think if you look at it, it's not just the Greens' position. I mean, if you look, there's a Senate inquiry at the moment into this, all of the submissions to that from a whole lot of people from legal background, and as well as the Commonwealth Ombudsman and the UNHCR, and the High Court decision itself said there are just nowhere near enough safeguards in place to protect the very basic human rights of those 800 asylum seekers who were sent back, even against being abused in Malaysia, let alone risk of being sent back into danger, which has happened very recently in Malaysia to refugees forced back to countries like China and Burma.
Let's change topics and back to you, Peter McGauran. Do you believe there's a need for a media inquiry in Australia?
No, it's a complete witch hunt against News Limited. Simple as that. It's an inquiry limited to newspapers, and newspapers are supposed to be old and dying and lacking in influence. But for the Labor Party, they want to silence their critics. I don't know why people aren't marching in the streets on this, whatever your political affiliation.
Andrew Bartlett, your view?
I mean, goodness me. I mean, most of the media is saying, this inquiry is so limited, what's the point? And then we're suddenly hearing, oh, this is, some witch hunt against poor little old powerless News Limited. I mean, give us a break. What's wrong with a bit of scrutiny of a wide and very important and very powerful industry? And frankly, it's not just about newspapers. It will feed into the ongoing Convergence Review, which is about a lot more than newspapers. And
there is scrutiny every day.
About the future of media is a real important thing to look at.
There's scrutiny every day, and it's called sales. It's called sales.
All right. Look, just quickly, very quickly from both of you. Peter McGauran, would it have been better, though, if this inquiry had at least included broadcast, maybe even us?
No, there's no need for a media inquiry. There's things called consumer
are we lily white?
demand.
Are we absolutely perfect in everything we do, Mr McGauran?
There's such a plethora of media outlets, whether it's electronic, online, print, journals. People can take their choice. They can buy, sell, whichever way they want, because the consumer, that is the voter, will drive all these issues. They'll walk away from any newspaper that's too blatantly critical of one side of politics or another, and if they do buy that newspaper, they're locked in as a voter anyway. This is an absolute red herring from the government's own self-induced problems.
And just before we go, a quick response to your both, quick on this question. You mentioned double dissolution elections before, Andrew Bartlett. Julia Gillard and the Labor government, how long do you see either lasting?
I mean, I must say I think that's very unlikely, but, everyone thought it was very unlikely that Kevin Rudd would reappear, and that's starting to look vaguely plausible, although not anytime soon, I don't think. I mean, I think at this stage the government's still most likely to go its full term, barring an accident, barring an unforeseen death, or perhaps Andrew Wilkie pulling the pin in May. But it is at a stage where, that's the most likely, but you can't predict it for sure.
And Peter McGauran, your view?
I agree with Andrew that the government is far, far more likely to run its full term than not, barring the unforeseen, but there is no possibility Julia Gillard will lead them to the next election. I would think over the summer break, given that they act like an opposition, and I spent 13 years in opposition, I very much doubt she'll return as Prime Minister in February.
You're putting some money on the fact that there's going to be a leadership replacement.
Well, unlike Paul Howes, I won't mortgage the house, but everything they do reminds me of all of those Peacock, Howard, Hewson, Downer years. They run to the other side's agenda, they panic in regard to the media, they're internally torn apart, and they dump leaders. I don't think she has any hope. And
Peter, would a leadership change quickly presage a possible leadership change in the opposition and move on Tony Abbott? Oh, certainly not. Tony Abbott has revitalised the coalition stocks. He's consistent. He's a known entity with the public. He's carving out a regard of respect, even if people don't always like him, as is the nature of leaders. Oh no, Tony Abbott is. I will put the house and the mortgage on Tony Abbott. We'll hold you to that. Peter McGauran in Sydney and Andrew Bartlett in Brisbane. Thank you both very much for your time this morning.
Thanks.